Thanks everyone for joining the channel today. I'm excited with another content, another video that we have for you guys today. Today I have a guest, Michelle Soares. She is with Goosehead Insurance. I'm very excited to have her on the show today. We have a few different topics that we want to cover. If you are a real estate investor, a landlord, I think you're going to be excited. So that's what we're going to cover today, right? Yes. Investor policies or landlord insurance. Mm-hmm. So Michelle, if you want to quickly introduce yourself and maybe talk to us a little bit about the options out there for real estate investors or people who want to invest in real estate. What are some of the things that they should be aware of insurance-wise that will make their life a little easier?
Okay, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Real quick, Michelle Soares with Goosehead Insurance. I launched my franchise agency a little bit over a year ago, and I love partnering with real estate agents and helping educating those out there who are looking for more information when it comes to their real estate as a landlord and making sure their renters are also covered as well. So when we look at landlord or investor policies, I'm a broker, so I have many options. Actually, I have over 56 carriers, so we can find something that's going to cover you as a landlord and the property that you want to insure.
Just a quick plug here. I think she touched on something that's important. If you're out there and you're looking for insurance options, working with a broker is always good. They're not going to be tied to one product from one specific agency, one specific company. They can look at an umbrella of different options and see what's the best fit for your needs, maybe the best cost benefit. So there's options. So it's always good working with a broker that can go in and see a number of options, in opposed to just say, well, I can only work with these companies, so that's what you're stuck with.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the beauty of a broker is I'm loyal to you as my client as opposed to being loyal to a specific carrier, because it makes more sense. I have contact with you on a regular basis as a client. I don't have contact in person ultimately with my carriers, so I get to be loyal to you and make sure if something happens, I'm there to help you through that claim. But I'm also there when maybe we need to change the policy or endorse the policy for something. I can help get you those next steps in that process, and you're never having to dial a 1-800 number.
that alone is worth working with a broker, because I personally just don't like it when, okay, something happens, right? You're already in distress because maybe it was an accident, maybe it was a storm, something, right? Usually if we're calling insurance, it's not a good thing, right? Yes. And then you're stuck on the phone, and then you get transferred and say, oh, this is a different department, because you call, well, residential, but yours a commercial policy because you're a landlord or investor or whatever, and you get bounced around, and then you wait, and then you talk to someone, and that someone will send over to someone else. And working with someone local is just easier, because I can just knock on your door and say, hey, this is what's going on, help me, and then you will connect the dots and come back to me, in opposed to sending me 20 different directions.
Yes, I help simplify the process. Ultimately, at the end of the day. But landlord policies can be complicated, but that's where I take the complication out, because I'm going to do a little bit of research. I'm going to look at the property record for the county. Was there a basement? Is there a basement? What's the square footage of the dwelling? What does it look like on paper? I'm going to also look at pictures to make sure we have the right exterior on the policy. So is it brick? Is it vinyl siding? What kind of roof is it? How old is the roof? All these things go into what on our end is an application. I put that in for you, and then they give me the information for the coverages and premium at the end of that process. But I can do that with multiple carriers to see what's going to be best for you and the property that you're investing in.
Great, absolutely. Let's say I'm not a landlord yet, mm-hmm. right? I want to be a landlord, and I'm thinking insurance even before I make that move and buy my first property. Are there red flags, things that would be make it, harder to insure a property that maybe I should be aware of before I even pull the trigger on a property?
That's a great question. And I know investors can get excited about this is the perfect property, it's a perfect location, but let's look at the history of that property, especially when it comes to claims. If there's been a water claim in the last 5 years, you're going to want to know why. And was it truly fixed? Because if it was maybe not a family that lived there, but it was also an investor that owned the home, sometimes things don't get fixed. And that's something you're going to want to make sure you look out for before you buy the property, is just look at the history of the claims specifically for that location.
Yeah, I know it. A lot of people are aware of, well, is it in the floodplain, right? Those are the things that a lot of people are aware of, but as an investment property, sometimes there's things that are overlooked,
Yes.
right? And there's things that will present higher risk or higher liability, swimming pool maybe, things of that nature. So for investment properties, I think it's always important to be aware of, what's in the property and what does that mean in terms of insurance or just my personal liability as an investor.
Sure.
Something happens to a tenant in there, what's my exposure?
Right, exactly. And that's so critical at that time of finding the right property is, what is the liability? Can we cover that? Has something tragic happened in the past? And so sometimes with a policy, that past history of claims is brought into the new policy. So we don't want the new landlord paying for what happened in the past necessarily. So we're going to look at different carriers and how they look at those type of things from the past to make sure we have something that works for you. And I want to go back to the flood policy. That's a big thing here in Columbus. The house I live in actually was in a flood, so I have a flood policy. But something I can do for you as an investor is go and get the report for the floodplain. If the home or part of the property is even in a floodplain, we can talk through those options. And I have also multiple carriers, both the national carrier for flood as well as private carriers for flood. And so we can see a big difference in premium based on who we look at.
So a floodplain is not necessarily a showstopper. It's just something that we should be aware of. Say, hey, if that's the situation, you have to pay a little extra, but it's not a big deal, right? You can still get insurance for it. You're just going to have to pay for that specific coverage
Correct.
for that property.
Correct.
Now, switching gears a little bit, a lot of people are maybe, I'm assuming, somewhat familiar with homeowner insurance. Now, what's the difference really between a landlord policy versus your standard homeowner insurance, right? So I have insurance for my property. I'm now buying an investment property. I want to have insurance for that one as well. Can I just get the regular homeowner insurance for that one? Can I get the landlord policy? Should I go one way or another? What's the difference there?
There is a big difference, actually. When we look at a homeowner's policy, there's coverages for everything inside and out of the home as well as the property. With a landlord, we're looking at specifically the dwelling. We're not covering contents because that's the renter's opportunity to do a renter's policy and cover their things that they're bringing into that home. So there's a big difference between a landlord policy and a homeowner's policy. A homeowner's policy is also designed, and it states in the application that the owner of the home lives in the home. That's really critical. So let's say you decide to rent out your home, but you leave it as a homeowner's policy. That carrier could deny a claim if it's not reprogrammed properly to specifically state what it is being used for.
Great.
So those are really important things. Just like maybe the home is vacant, it's under renovation. The policy needs to be endorsed for that, or possibly even changed to accommodate that type of activity that's happening there.
It's important because policies are tied to specific use cases for that property, right? And it's the same with a car policy, right? If you're using your car for Uber or, as a commercial vehicle, it's not the same as just your everyday commute car. So you have to be aware of, if you're changing the use case for that property, talk to your insurance agents. What's the implication of that change? If you're now turned your property into a duplex or an office or something, what does that mean? Because then you want to make sure that you have the right coverage for that use case for the property.
Correct. So if you don't, the carrier that currently insures that property can deny the claim, and that's what you don't want to have happen. So the communication with your agent, being very transparent with them is very important in all scenarios, whether it's home or auto.
Good deal. Now, just if you're watching this, I'm assuming you are interested in learning more about this specific topic. So walk us through, why is it important for a real estate investor to have an investor policy on that property? What are some of the benefits? What are specific, use cases and coverage options available for that specific product?
Good question. So with a landlord or investor policy, the policy actually has an additional coverage for you as a landlord in case there was a claim. Let's say there was a fire in the kitchen. We had to move the tenants out during that renovation time period. The policy would actually still pay the landlord the rent for each month. So they're not losing rent, they're not losing the income, but the policy would pay that. Now, we want to make sure the policy is set up for that. A policy can also be set up for vandalism. Let's say you didn't get the right tenants in that location and it's time to evict them, but they've damaged the inside of the house. That can also be covered by the policy. So there's a lot of things that it can do as a landlord investor policy that you wouldn't typically see on a homeowner's policy.
Yeah, the good thing, and I think that's something that you alluded to, is, there's a displacement because something happened. That policy is treating that property almost like a commercial, right? It's a business. It's an income generating asset. So now that policy is designed to cover the loss of revenue because something happened. So you're not only getting the property fixed, but now, the cost of opportunity is also covered in there, because if it takes 6 months to fix up the place, you're losing money for 6 months.
Absolutely.
There's coverage specific to address that situation as well.
It's protecting you ultimately as an investor, that you're still generating revenue from that property.
How about liability, right? Another thing that's big, you're dealing with people, you're at the house, something happens, maybe because the house is old, maybe because tenant wasn't paying attention. What are some of the things liability-wise that a investor policy can help us be protected?
Both the investor on the property and the renter's insurance can come into play in a liability situation. So let's say the renter, their tenant, invited people over, had a bonfire in the backyard, and some people maybe got a little rowdy and it got hurt. Maybe they tripped over the fire. Anything is possible. And then ultimately they need to go to the hospital because they need some medical attention. The renter's policy can take care of some of the basics of that, but the landlord policy can be supplemental to that. But we want the policy to respond to the party that actually happened with. So as a landlord, you want to make sure they have renter's insurance, because that's the first line or first policy it's going to respond, because the tenant is there. It's going to cover the tenant. And then the landlord's policy is going to come into play secondly, especially if there's a lawsuit. We know lawyers like to sue anyone and anything involved. So if the tenant were to get a lawyer involved, they would sue multiple policies, and that's going to protect you in that process. So that liability limit is important. I've seen policies that are $100,000 as a renter's insurance, which is very inexpensive. But I think ultimately, if we're thinking there's a family in there, more than one person, you would probably want to look at a higher liability limit.
Okay. You touched a little bit on renter's insurance, right? So there's a difference between the two,
Absolutely.
right? Your landlord insurance and your renter's insurance. Can you just elaborate a little bit on the difference between the two? I think we touched on it a little bit, just so that people are clear. Two different products designed to two different use cases. Different parties are being protected by the different policies.
Absolutely. So as a landlord, you have your policy to protect you and the dwelling that you own. The renter's policy is going to protect that tenant moving into your dwelling. So whatever they bring with them, their contents, whatever they're going to put in that U-Haul or their truck to bring to the location, all that personal property needs to be covered on that renter's policy. As a landlord, you do not need to cover that on your policy unless you have something in the home. Like some landlords will, maybe there's some furniture they left behind, a dinner set, in the dining room, something to that effect can be added to a landlord policy, but ultimately anything that's brought into the home by the tenant should be covered on the renter's policy.
Now, one thing, and I am a landlord myself, right? So I invest in real estate. And one thing, and I like having this kind of discussions because it's both educational, but I also learn in the process every time as well. But one of the reasons why I ask my tenants to have a renter's insurance policy, it's because of property damages itself. So I do have my own policy, but if they have their own policy and they cause property damage for whatever reason, I can then use their coverage and not have to use my own policy and have a claim against my policy because their policy can cover certain types of damage that they cause to the property.
Correct. Now, just to be clear, the two policies are owned by two different people, right? So the renter's policy, the renter would have to place that claim on their policy. So you cannot, as a landlord, place a claim on their policy. They would have to initiate that because that's the name or named insured on that policy. But yes, if there was damage to the home, you could request that policy respond and have them place the claim then at that time to repair or replace whatever that might be within that home.
Absolutely. And one practical example is, they do something, they cause some property damage. Mm-hmm. As a landlord, I would usually charge them for that damage, but in opposed to them paying personally for that, they can put a claim against their policy and have their insurance take care of that. Now, not everything will work in every situation. It's
Correct.
A case by case.
Correct.
It depends on what happened, what the situation was. Mm-hmm. But having both policies in place, you're double covered. You are covered, yes, both of them, but there's some benefits to me as a landlord if my tenant has renter's insurance in opposed to just my own policy.
Right. I think actually this is missed sometimes when you own a property and you have someone else living there. They're like, don't worry about the renters and policy, but it's really important for you protecting your investment that they do have that policy because it's going to cover them in those scenarios. So a policy, an action or activity has to happen to trigger that policy, like wind, hail, water, the weight of ice and snow, fire, tornado. Those type of things have to happen to trigger a policy. Now, those things, mostly, some are on the outside, some are on the inside. So it depends on what, like you said, what happens, how the policy is going to respond, or which policy may respond.
Exactly. And also, when you put that policy together, there's things that you can choose from. There are options. There are
Absolutely.
Different types of coverage. It depends on how deep you want to go into it, how much you want to protect yourself. You can go all in and try to cover as much as possible. You can get basic coverage. So it depends on your needs, on your tenants, on your specific property. The good thing is having someone who understands the insurance world. Mm-hmm. Michelle can walk you through and say, hey, with your use case for this property, this is what I would recommend and this is why. And she can walk you through what that would cost. So, and you can then make an educated decision on
Absolutely.
What's the best for me here. So there's always leverage someone who understands insurance so that they will help you and guide you through what's the best coverage for my specific use case.
Absolutely. That's what we're here for. We're here to educate and help the landlord or investor make wise decisions on ultimately the cost, right? The cost of owning that property. So the property taxes, the insurance, any upgrades or things that they do to the home, and then the rent that they bring in is the return on their investment. But we want to make sure that it's all equitable at the end of the year, right?
Absolutely. And another plug for the renter's insurance, it's fairly inexpensive
Yes.
to get renter's insurance. So it's not something that's going to make them not be able to afford rent because now you have a little bit extra there for renter's insurance. So it's, in my opinion, it's totally worth to request and require that your tenants have it because now you're both covered in the case of something happens.
So I can give you a quick example with a liability and property coverage on a renter's policy. you're going to average $25, $30, $45 a month. Very inexpensive. And if they have an auto policy and they combine both of them, they're going to maximize discounts.
It's
And
one
that's-
trip to Starbucks.
Exactly.
one trip to Starbucks,
Exactly.
and you cover for the whole month,
There
right?
you
So, 2 coffees
Yeah,
in.
drink your coffee at home for 1 week and then you're
Yeah,
good.
and you're good.
Perfect example.
Yeah. So very inexpensive, right? If your tenant cannot afford one trip to Starbucks, maybe you should look for a different tenant.
Yeah, that's wise. That's a red flag, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. These are all great questions, and I'll be honest, Dan. There's no bad questions because there's so many scenarios, so many different things that I've been asked over the years about how does this work, what happens in this situation, and obviously we're always learning, but every carrier is going to be a little bit different when what they will and won't cover. But even if we bought a policy and let's say we wanted to add something, we can always endorse the policy for different coverages in case something were to pop up. But then that's the open communication you have with your agent.
And that's the thing about insurance, right? I'm sure you have some crazy stories about things like, how did that happen, right? Yeah, myself as a landlord, about a year ago or so, I had a drunk driver knock out a front porch of one of my rentals. So he just drove right through it and knocked that out. And I had insurance, and insurance, helped me with that. But I would not be expecting for someone else, a drunk driver, to come in and, knock off that porch. So there's always, a risk out there.
There is, absolutely. So I'm assuming you didn't know the driver that hit the porch?
I have no idea. It was, and he was driving a commercial, a company car. So it gets a little bit more complicated, but we were able to, address the issue. But now, if you don't have coverage, now you're at the mercy of whoever caused the damage, or nature, or ultimately you're on the hook for it if you're not insured.
Correct. And that is a scenario I've dealt with recently. I had a gentleman that was buying a home, and he was telling the story about when he bought auto insurance online and didn't get the coverages for uninsured and underinsured motorists. And it happened, he had an accident, they didn't have insurance, and he paid thousands of dollars to repair his car, to pay for the rental car during that time period, to put him back to where he was because he never selected that, because he wasn't educated on that and just decided to buy it online. That's why the agent's really going to help fend off those things. They look small maybe on the application, but they can really be a big thing in the end when we are at time of claim.
Great. Okay, so final thoughts. If you're in real estate and you want to be a landlord, look into an investor's policy, right? A landlord coverage is very important. Especially as your number of units grow, your exposure grows,
Absolutely.
your risk grows. If you have dozens of properties, chances are there's always something going on.
Yes.
There's a big storm coming in town, and now you have 20, 30 properties under your belt. These chances are one of them might be affected by the storm. There's something going to happen. If you do have any additional questions about this specific topic, I do have a contact information for Michelle here. Just give her a call. She is always available to answer. The good thing is you can text her almost any time of the day. She's like, yep, I got you. And she will text you back. So do you sleep with your eyes open or something?
No, I try to get some sleep, but that's the thing is having an agent. I've had someone call me at 9:00 on a Saturday night, and their daughter was out of state in a car accident. What do we do? I was able to answer the phone and get them where they needed to do, so she got to safety and everything was okay in the end. But in those scenarios, panic happens, right? The unknown is in front of you. What do you do? And that's what I'm there for, to help you get through those time frames.
Great. Good thing is, even though we're talking about landlord policy today, maybe you're watching, you're not a real estate investor, but you're looking for a homeowner policy. You're looking for other options. You're looking for an umbrella policy. She got you covered. So whatever questions you have in regards to specific products, or maybe you just want to get a quote, compared to what you already have, can she give me something better. Or even better, maybe just review your coverage. Say, hey, is my coverage adequate to my situation? Right? She can look at your policy and say, you know what, I think you're underinsured. I think you should, add specific coverages. Just a second look. It doesn't cost you anything to get a second opinion, right? And sometimes people, they like practical things, right? So they write the policy 10 years later, still with the same agent, same company, same everything, but their situation may have changed drastically in 10 years.
Absolutely.
Versus maybe that was okay 10 years ago. Maybe now you should be, fine-tuning and updating that policy as well because your life situation is now changed.
Absolutely.
Maybe you didn't have kids. Now you have multiple kids. Yes. Maybe your property was worth 100 and now it's worth 300.
Correct.
Let's make sure that your policy is updated to your current life situation so that you are covered no matter what.
I think that's a great point, Dan. We have a lot of DIYers out there that want to do those home improvements and change out cabinets and upgrade bathrooms. When you do that, let your agent know because the value of your home has increased. And then if there were ever a claim, they know that the value of that cabinetry or the countertop is a different value as opposed to a builder's grade. So those are important things. Again, being very transparent with your agent. They can be your best friend.
Absolutely. Again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to have you here today. If you like this type of content, we will be creating more and more content. We have an expert here to help us with anything that's insurance related. We will create more videos about insurance, different policies, different products. So stay tuned, and we hope to see you next.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here today.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.